We played better in the second half, did a better job in the running game, which allowed us to do a little bit more in the passing game. So good team win. Got to get back to work, but I was proud of the way the guys came out and fought. I thought they competed well, played with a lot of energy, and I think it showed.
All right, welcome in to Purple Daily. Mackey and Judd, Declan Goff producing, and we're going to dive into a little bit later in the show our nerd football segment of the week. But just real quick, you guys, we're sitting here. It's Tuesday, November 3rd. It's just a massive day for this country, and we just hope that everything, when it all comes down and the clock winds down, that everything turns out the way that we would like to see it turn out for the Vikings at the trade deadline. Just want to throw that out there.
Make your voice heard.
Just want to make sure if someone's offering a second-round pick for a Riley Reef, okay, let's just make sure that you're making the smart moves at the trade deadline today.
I guarantee
only the
like
NFL would keep their trade deadline on election day.
But it makes sense. It makes perfect sense, and here's why: it's their off day.
I know that's
and by the way, well,
tomorrow's an off day too. No, I guess it's just today.
It's not. But in 2020, let's be crystal clear: what's more important, the country or the National Football League?
Oh, the National Football League.
Thank you very much. In fact, you know what? Election day should have been moved.
Some people are saying country above party, and that might be true, but we're also saying the league above country, above
Football.
Party. Trade deadline day.
Partying second. It's the league partying. Oh, you meant party. Sorry.
Partying. I got you. So, all right. So we'll get into all kinds of stuff here, Vikings related, but a quick shout out to one of our partners. Federated Insurance helps keep us afloat on this show. Whether you like that or not, you can send your feedback to Federated. But Federated Insurance has been around since 1904, helping business owners in the state of Minnesota. They're also on Twitter at FederatedINS with trusted resources and snippets for business owners. So if you're a business owner looking for just more peace of mind, frontline protection, you can find a full list of the industries Federated protects at federatedinsurance.com. And you can also find your local marketing representative and the person that you would be in contact with on a regular basis. Remember, at Federated, it's always our business to protect yours. Gentlemen, before we get into our nerd football segment of the week, which has a couple really interesting Dalvin Cook nuggets and a Justin Jefferson statistic that's going to blow your minds, or maybe not, I want to bring a Mike Zimmer appreciation take to the table.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
I think we've been sitting here and even going back to right before the playoffs started last year, I think much of the conversation and Zimmer, Zimmer going into a contract year, would he get an extension? He did. But basically, the entire last 10 to 12 months, the conversation surrounding Mike Zimmer has been whether he should be fired or not, right? It's been, does he deserve to be the Vikings coach? Is he offensive-minded enough in a league that's trending in that direction? Is he the guy to develop a quarterback of the future? And all those questions are going to remain, and we will continue to dissect those things. But I just want to say, Mike Zimmer, in a year where the Vikings drafted 15 rookies, in a game in which they played at one point, I think 7 rookies out of the 11 players on the field for one of the snaps, 7 of them were rookies. Mike Zimmer did a wonderful job against the Green Bay Packers. He has put together, I think, that game against the Packers, probably one of his best game plans in the 7 years as Vikings head coach. And my Mike Zimmer appreciation take for you is that we don't spend enough time talking about the luxury that other coaches have in this league of a steady, reliable, top 10 quarterback, a guy that you can just count on when the game is close in the fourth quarter to give you a shot more often than not to win a game. Mike Tomlin with Ben Roethlisberger, Pete Carroll with Russell Wilson, Bill Belichick with Tom Brady, right? I think my take here is if Mike Zimmer at any point during this 7-year stretch had multiple years of reliable top 6, top 7 quarterback play combined with his defensive chess mastery, being able to put together game plans, I think the Vikings would have a Super Bowl right now. So that doesn't mean they should sign into a lifetime extension. Doesn't mean that the league isn't changing. But I think if you were to say, listen, Mike, we're going to go back in time, and instead of messing around with rookie Teddy Bridgewater, and then he gets hurt, and then Sam Bradford for a year, and then Case Keenum for a minute, and then Kirk Cousins, you're going to get Ben Roethlisberger for 7 years. You're going to get Russell Wilson for 7 years. I think the Vikings would have a Super Bowl. Your thoughts?
Russell Wilson, I would say yes. Roethlisberger, I don't know for sure. I think they would have been to one for sure. Yeah, I could see that. If you go back to 2017, 13-3, right? And you put a quarterback, and Keenum was fun. I mean, he was fantastic. But if you put a quarterback like Wilson on that team, because what does Russell not do in the conference title game?
Freak out and
against
panic.
Philly.
He
doesn't throw that pass across the field that I think got tipped initially, gets returned for a touchdown. And at that point in time, the Vikings had a touchdown lead in that game, and it completely changed the ebb and flow of that game, completely altered it towards Philly, and they then kicked the Vikings' butt from there on out.
You're also not screwed when you fall down by 2 touchdowns.
If they had drafted Russell Wilson, I think you are probably right. Now here's my question back, though. If the Teddy experiment, which was tracking pretty well, if the Teddy experiment had worked, would he have a Super Bowl? Because the only quarterback, I think when Mike does get fired, the only quarterback that should be put in the story about his tenure here as a guy that if he didn't select him, certainly loved him, was Teddy. So if Teddy works and the leg never goes, and in 17 instead of Keenum, that is Teddy in what by then, his third year?
So Teddy's third year his fourth year would have been the Keenum year.
Okay.
17.
So if in year 4, that is Teddy, do they go to and potentially win a championship? Because I do believe that was Mike's grand plan.
So I think most people are going to hone in on that one game, right? The NFC Championship game is the game in question. And the blame, rightfully so, goes to the defense for giving up, 38 points, I think, to Nick Foles and company?
Yeah,
it's like 35 or 38.
It was awful.
It was like a 38-7 final or just something ridiculous, right?
Yep.
And so, yes, the defense was the biggest problem in that game, but the offense also completely shut down after the mistake. So they scored the first touchdown. I believe the Vikings went up 7-0 in that game. And then Case Keenum, with the Vikings driving for a chance to go up 10-0 or 14-0, throws just a terrible interception. And you could almost just feel the sideline, and you could feel the coaches just tighten up and go, oh, that's the mistake that we were sort of waiting for Case to make all season. If you had an established, even like a Matt Ryan, just like an established, just competent, widely regarded top quarterback that people have confidence in, I think that game might play out differently. But I also look at some of the other seasons. I mean, 2015, the Vikings took a big step forward defensively. Even with Teddy, they had the Seahawks beat in that game if Blair Walsh doesn't miss a field goal. But imagine, if you were to take what they had built defensively in 2015 in Mike Zimmer's second year, and Teddy was steady, he was fine.
Yeah.
If you were to replace him with, again, Ben, with Russell Wilson, with Tom Brady, et cetera, just name, we throw these names out and it's almost laughable. You're throwing out some of the best quarterbacks in the league. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if at some point the Vikings had that? And that's my argument, is that
right.
We judge these coaches, and Mike Zimmer is exhibit A. We judge them, and Rex Ryan could also maybe be in this bin too, because those Jets teams he coached and the Bills, what if a good defensive-minded coach were given, and Bill Belichick, Bill Belichick is a defensive genius. That's how he got his start with the Giants in the 1980s. And, here's the greatest quarterback of all time to combine with your defensive leadership and prowess.
Who you found, yeah.
Boom, dynasty.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just think it should be more considered. And I would look at, in order, I would say the 2017 season and that game, the gateway to the Super Bowl. I would even look at 2016. Sam Bradford was okay. He had a really good season, but he wasn't on the level of some of these guys I'm talking about. And that second year, that 11-5 season, what if they had an actual dude at quarterback that wasn't just a young learning rookie game manager? Would they have had a Super Bowl?
2016, though, I fault Mike for as well, because they got off to that great start. 6-0, I believe? And then Mike's the one that sort of freaked out. And coaching wise, I think that's probably one of Mike's worst jobs with a good team, because the whole thing of before the bye week trying to basically say fat cats die, and then you play
stuffed
one
animal thing.
Yeah, and then you play one bad game, one bad game. You're 5-1 and you freak out. What are you doing? That made no sense. But I do believe that I would love to go back and just see what the Teddy Mike with a good defense experiment is, because that takes him through his entire first contract, which, by the way, was dirt cheap, right? And if you do that, I think among grand plans, that was how, when Mike got the job and they drafted Teddy with the last pick of the first round that I think they got in a trade from Seattle, I do think that Mike said, this is my guy.
Also,
And it might have worked.
Also, look at the quarterbacks who have represented the NFC the last 5 years. Okay, so Jimmy Garoppolo, Jared Goff, Nick Foles, Matt Ryan, Cam Newton. Now, Newton and Ryan won MVPs their respective seasons. They took their teams to the Super Bowl. But when we look at those quarterbacks right now, are any of those guys top 10 quarterbacks? Like they're borderline. Matt Ryan maybe top 10, right? So it's not to diminish that. Oh, would Russell Wilson or Ben Roethlisberger or Aaron Rodgers give Mike Zimmer and the Vikings a better Super Bowl chance? Of course, no duh. But it is fascinating when you look, and even if you continue going down the decade, the mediocre quarterbacks that have gotten there with better infrastructure and good circumstance in a weak league, it's fascinating. It's truly fascinating.
Yeah. I even like the first couple of years of the Kirk Cousins Vikings, where they've been 8-7-1, 10-6. And that includes a quarterback that never outside of the big throw against the Saints, and he deserves that credit.
Yes.
But he doesn't give you 2 or 3 extra games in the regular season where, guys, I'm going to bail you out here. Like, you wonder why. Well, how do the Seahawks sometimes with no defense and no offensive line, how do they win 11 or 12 games, right? Well, it's because their quarterback like single-handedly gets you 3 of them by doing what he did against the Vikings a few weeks ago on national TV. And so these last few years, think about 8-7-1, 10-6, and then obviously this year's been kind of a clunker, but they're above 500 in the Kirk Cousins era without a quarterback that gets you those extra 2, 3, 4 wins in the fourth quarter, because he doesn't complete fourth quarter comebacks.
So I am anti coaches being the GM as well. Okay. So to be clear, I don't advocate for that. But how prophetic was Mike with the clip that you played? I think it was on last week's Purple Daily, Phil, where Mike basically came out at the combine before Cousins was signed, and made it very clear that I don't want to take away from what we, and particularly I, in Mike's case, do really well by overpaying a quarterback and crippling ourselves from a cap standpoint. How prophetic was that? Because to me, it has proven to be absolutely true. Like, they are so compromised now. They can't just go out and sign guys. Like, they can't let's go get a guard. No, you can't. Let's go get a corner. No, you can't. So how much do we almost have to go back to that quote from Zim at the time and say, clearly Rick had his own agenda and ideas, and then Rick got his QB. But that QB so took away from what Mike could do well, it almost put them at opposite ends of the spectrum as far as how to build what Mike saw as being the team he was trying to build.
Yeah. Do you think, based on what he said, which is like you summed it up, I mean, it's him saying, let's not spend a ton of money on something that's not going to allow us to keep doing the things that we're good at, which are defense, run the ball, offensive line is something. If you could go back and say, all right, Mike, you can, or even if you asked him now, like,
sure,
you can either pay Kirk Cousins $33 million a year, or you can have a rookie quarterback that isn't Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. So like kind of an experimental rookie quarterback with some tools that makes a lot less money. So it frees you up to go get a couple more tools defensively if you want to get another linebacker, whatever it is, right? I think he would, even though both of those quarterback options are going to be a pain in the ass for him, because I think he gets exasperated by Kirk, and I think he would for sure get exasperated by a rookie quarterback. I think he would choose the rookie quarterback. I really do. I think he would choose door number 2 without even knowing really what's behind door number 2.
I think you are 1,000,000% correct. And so here's the curveball to the entire discussion. I think you're correct based largely on this. Wind or not on Sunday in Green Bay, that was, as a head coach, Mike Zimmer's ideal offensive game plan. And I think there's a ton of folks who will say it's ridiculous. You can't just run. But his philosophy, like it or not, is simple. Remove the quarterback as much as possible from losing the game for you. How do you do that? You run a ton. You don't throw a ton. You eat up clock. And what was one key to Sunday, second half especially? His defense, which he knows is not great, and he's basically trying to make up schemes, right? his defense didn't have to spend nearly as much time on the field as if they had thrown the ball and it was incompletions, and now it's 3 and out. So I think, Phil, that your point is right, that he would take door 2 without knowing the identity of the person behind door 2, based on the fact that he would just tell the guy from behind door 2, hand the ball off to Dalvin and get out of the way.
But you know what? I think that wire, I agree. I think like his wiring from the get-go that's why I love Teddy so much, because training wheels Teddy, like Teddy's taking more risks now, and Teddy he's putting up numbers now and stuff, but like training wheels Teddy in the first couple of years was perfect for Mike, because Teddy wasn't going to flush a game down the toilet for you.
Mm-hmm.
He had more throwaways, I think, in his second year than any quarterback in the league. Like, he'd roll out to the right and throw it out of bounds by 10 yards. And Mike Zimmer's over there like, attaboy. That's right. Punt to win, baby. Let's just be conservative. And so 2 things on that. Number one, I think if he were to have been given an actual like needle moving stud quarterback, and I keep going back, we'll say Russell Wilson or Pat Mahomes, whoever that is, I think he would feel differently. Obviously, he would say, "All right, Russ, you go. We're gonna let you cook. Go do your thing."
You see Mike saying that.
So my defense is gonna be great, but like we're gonna let you go do your thing too. But if you look at, and this is the second thing off your point, if you look at his history, the teams he's been a coach at, Dallas in the early 2000s, Atlanta for a minute in 2007, and then Cincinnati, and then into Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
He has been stricken with quarterback trauma. Like his first year in Dallas as a coordinator in 2000, he had Troy Aikman in his last year. So like broken down old Troy Aikman, very limited Troy Aikman. And then he had sort of broken down old Drew Bledsoe, and they bounced around to different quarterbacks. That period of Dallas Cowboys football was like a who's who of random dudes
Drew Bledsoe
in the early 2000s. All right. Then he goes to Atlanta. And he has Joey Harrington is the starting quarterback in Atlanta.
Yeah, he started here
in 2007.
Opening day, yes.
Okay, then he gets to the Bengals, and before the Bengals get Andy Dalton in the draft in like 2011 or whatever year that was, which also Andy Dalton, a limited guy, like he could throw for some yards, but Andy Dalton, very Kirk Cousins-like in that way.
Mm-hmm.
He had guys like, let me see here. Ryan Fitzpatrick was a starting quarterback in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
For 12 games in 2008, which was Mike Zimmer's first year as defensive coordinator there. They had broken down like post-surgery Carson Palmer. So my point is, for 20 years, Mike Zimmer, as the defensive overlord of all these teams, Dallas into Atlanta, Cincinnati, Minnesota, and obviously he's the coach too of Minnesota, but he's never really had the top 5 quarterback. And so he has been mentally wired to treat quarterbacks in the don't screw it up way, right? So I would be so curious to see if it was flipped around. You get to do all your defensive things, and you can lean on this guy to bail you out in the fourth quarter if needed. I think he'd have a Super Bowl. So,
yeah, I think there's a good chance. But I just find him, I find him to be an interesting case based on the fact that he is definitely a coach who so believes in what he does defensively that he basically wants the offense to do its job and then just be done with it so that my defense can play. But he doesn't want his defense on the field too much, because he knows if you do that, especially with the current Vikings defense, it's pressing his luck.
Yeah. All right, this is kind of a good segue, actually, into our nerd football segment of the week every Tuesday.
Get those nerds! Nerds!
Where we throw out various statistics and nuggets and trends from the week that was or from the season to this point. And before we dive in, a cheap plug, Vikings Line. We had great numbers again and great interaction on that show on our YouTube channel on Sunday. Right after every Vikings game finishes up, we are pulling Vikings fans into the video with us, getting your takes and your thoughts on the game. And you can email, well, 2 things. You can find it podcast form on the Purple Daily podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, scorenorth.com, and on the Purple Daily YouTube channel, youtube.com/Purple Daily Podcast. And if you would like to be part of the show, you can email. Declan's been sifting through emails the entire season, VikingsVentline@gmail.com to get in on the show every single week. Let's start with this one. Dalvin Cook.
Get those nerds! Nerds!
Pretty good season. Pretty good season for Dalvin Cook.
Yep.
Here's some statistics. He is second in the NFL in rushing yards behind only Derrick Henry. He has 652 rushing yards through 6 games.
Games played for
7. Henry's
Okay.
played 7 games.
Henry's 7. Okay.
The guys in the 3rd and 4th spots have played 8 games.
Okay.
So
he's
he's
two-
ahead of guys who played 2
down
more
on them.
games. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
He's first in yards per carry among running backs with at least 100 carries this year, 5.3 yards per carry, which is
Mhm.
amazing. He's first in rushing touchdowns with 10 rushing touchdowns in 6 games.
Wow.
It's ridiculous.
Wow.
He's 3rd in yards from scrimmage behind only Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. He has 779 yards from scrimmage. He's first in the NFL in tackles avoided per Pro Football Focus. Oh,
So not
missed
after
tackles.
not after contact. It's actually avoiding tackles altogether.
It's tackles that probably should have been made. So I guess you could say this is their version of a
Okay.
missed tackle.
So the
but-
Packers suck.
Well,
the Packers
did.
defense. Yes.
and others that but it's a lot of it's he's like one of the most elusive running backs
He's
in the NFL.
shifty. He's shifty. I get it.
And then also per Pro Football Focus, Dalvin Cook is first in breakaway runs, and those are classified as 15-yard runs or more. He has the most breakaway runs of any running back in the NFL, even though his long is only 39 yards. So a lot of just like
Wow.
big chunk runs. Also worth noting, though, he has 14 catches only on the receiving end, 14 catches in 6 games. So there's your Dalvin Cook statistical
That's
snapshot.
pretty damn impressive.
Would you like to see
Stay
more
healthy,
than 14
baby.
catches in 6 games, though?
Yeah. I'd like to see it be more like 22 or so.
Yeah, how about like 3 or 4 a game? Is that too much to ask for?
But
No, I don't think it is.
But again, the problem now is that requires your quarterback to throw the football, and we have decided that's probably a bad idea.
Even before this, though, I mean, Kirk
You could dump it off to him easily. Yes.
wasn't finding Dalvin.
In all seriousness, yes, he probably should have more.
How about this Justin Jefferson statistic here?
Get those nerds! Nerd! Nerds!
Pro Football Focus has a number called yards per route run. So it's basically how impactful are you as a receiver per snap, essentially, per pass play, right? Justin Jefferson is the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, yards per route run. Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, and DeAndre Hopkins are 2, 3, and 4. How's that for a list? Those are 3. I would say Julio Jones, maybe a Hall of Famer. DeAndre Hopkins, maybe a Hall of Famer. Devontae Adams is just sort of emerging into his prime years. And Justin Jefferson sits on top of that list, yards per route run.
The one thing, gentlemen, that I never thought I would say going into the start of this season is this one, and I believe it to be true. The Vikings don't miss Stephon Diggs at all.
It's crazy, but
Like,
it's true.
That sounds so stupid to say because they're not that good, right? And so you'd say, oh, yeah, but I don't think there's a but.
I mean, could you imagine a world where if you throw it back to the late 1990s, is there a world where they don't trade Stephon Diggs and they draft Justin Jefferson, and now you've got your 3 deep again?
Does Thielen willingly do what Jake Reed did?
Because that's what would happen, right?
But I mean, Jake Reed was really good about that, I think. Like
And
you
Ja-
would literally need him to say, I don't mind basically being the third guy.
And part of it was natural football selection, and that Jake Reed suffered a back injury in
True.
1998, and
Yes.
just sort of like, he's going to be sidelined for 6 games, and then nature ran its course, and Randy Moss became
Right.
the number 1 guy. But you're right; it's crazy to think. But of all the problems on this team, missing Stephon Diggs, I would say you miss his leadership
Yes.
more than
Sure.
you miss him on the field because
Yeah.
Justin Jefferson's been so good.
Yes. And that is why the only bad thing to me about what took place on Sunday is Jefferson getting 4 targets in that entire game is just not enough because I want to see him get more. He's too fun to watch to be like, hey, here's 3 catches for 27 yards, kid.
Yeah,
That's really good. No.
yeah, he's a good football player.
Get those nerds! Nerd! Nerd!
All right, offensive line. The Vikings offensive
Oh,
line.
this is going to be good.
They allowed 2 pressures only on Kirk Cousins, and neither of those 2 pressures were attributed to individual players. There was the one where they just had like too many rushers for, I think CJ Ham stepped up and took a linebacker, and then a corner came in and Kirk got smoked.
Yes.
So they did have, the Packers had only 2 pressures in that game
Yes.
on Kirk Cousins on the 15 dropbacks, 14 pass attempts, 1 sack. But none of Kirk Cousins' throws traveled more than 10 yards in the air. So the offensive line did a great job. They did a great job run blocking first and foremost. On the pass protection, they also did a good job, but I think scheme and lack of attempts probably insulated Kirk Cousins more than anything else.
And I'm not saying that the Vikings are not going to get to a point in time, and it might be against Detroit. I don't know. They're going to get to a point where they fall down significantly and have to pass. But how emboldened is Zim right now to believe that his football offensive stew works? Like everything that he wants to do, help them win. Because Cousins wasn't going to get pressure because you didn't ask him to pass.
Yeah, it's just not like it's their ideal formula.
Yes.
But it's not a formula you can just replicate every week.
But I'm just saying, if you're
happen.
Zim, if you are Zim, you are going to put that film in and say, well, boys, I've been telling you this for a few years, but watch this again.
Yeah, and
you're right, Phil, but I'm just saying it's the formula that he loves, and on Sunday it worked perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the get Dalvin Cook going, get feeling good about your run game, go downhill,
and they can run block. That offensive line can run block.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider them the road graders of like the 2012 Vikings, but they're better at run blocking.
Yes,
than pass blocking for the most part.
I don't think they're a liability when it comes to blocking for the run. I think if you tell Kirk we're going to have to air this thing out 50 times, that offensive line becomes a problem.
Actually, we should add this statistic when it comes to pass and run blocking. So among all 32 NFL teams this season, pass blocking, the Vikings rank 28th, and that includes this last game against the Packers.
Okay.
And run blocking, they rank 19th. So they're sort of a middle of the pack run blocking team, but better than, so that matches up with the eye test for sure.
Yes.
And then this final one for you guys.
Get those nerds! Nerds! Nerds!
The Vikings are 2-5. I was curious, have they ever made the playoffs at 2-5? The answer is no. Here are their 2-5 starts. Now they've come pretty close a couple of times.
Yeah.
So they 1962, they just sort of lost the rest of their games. They finished 2-11-1, I believe.
Tough year for the boys.
1963, they finished 5-8-1.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Was the 2005 team with Ticey 2-5?
Yeah, 84 they were 3-13.
Yeah.
02 they went 6-10. 05 they went 9-7.
With Brad Cook coming off the bench to replace Dante after Dante got hurt.
And then they fired Mike Tice in the locker room after that season was over.
Yes, poor kid got the press release first.
07 they went 8-8. And then they jumped. Then they traded for Jared Allen the next offseason.
That's right.
2010 they fought back to 6-10. 2014 they fought back to 7-9. That was Mike Zimmer's first year as head coach here. And then this year the story remains to be seen. So what would you guys, if you had to right now, knowing what you saw against the Packers, if you had to, we won't pick the whole schedule here again, but if you had to guess as to what their record's going to be, what would you say?
Dex, you want to go ahead?
I'd probably say 6-10. I really truly still think it's probably 6-10. There's probably 4 more wins on the schedule. I obviously think they should beat the Jaguars. I think they'll beat the Lions at least once. Lions are a little bit better than I think we all thought they were. They'll beat the Bears at least once, but you still got the Buccaneers, the Saints on the schedule. It's still gonna be tough, I think, to get to 500. Their record will be better than what we thought it was going to be when they were first, obviously 1-4 or 1-5 going into the Packers game. But I would say 6-10.
I think Declan's right. And can I give you my ideal how this unfolds? My ideal is this: 6-10, but they become more competitive and look good.
Yeah.
And Zim coaches his ass off, and it's fantastic. And he goes to Dallas because Jerry says he can win down here. Zim's going to bring his defense down here. It's going to be fantastic. Okay. The other portion is Kirk actually starts to they so make up for Kirk's deficiencies that Kirk starts to consistently look pretty good. Jimmy G's out in San Francisco. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's over. Okay. It's over.
I think you have to make that call today.
Oh, I do too. But what I'm saying is, let's say Kirk starts to get sort of hot for Kirk. I mean, just starts to look good.
Yeah.
Respectable for sure. Kirk Cousins fulfills really what God wants, which is for him to be Kyle Shanahan's quarterback. That's what the good Lord wants. And Zim's in Dallas, Kirk's in San Fran, and the Vikings get to hit a reset button, which is it might be about time, and you build something up.
I like where you're going with this. I actually have a best case scenario in all facets over the next 6 months that I want to unveil later this week on Purple Daily.
Okay.
Like if you could script out the perfect, and again, with the mission statement, win a Super Bowl,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yep.
And it involves at least one of the things that you just mentioned for sure.
I also think that at some point in time this week on this show, we need to do a dive into, instead of just discussing it, because I think it's plausible, but it's going to be somewhat difficult getting Kirk to San Fran. The salary cap going down is going to be a major problem. Okay. But I honestly,
it's going to come down like 25 million for every team.
but I honestly believe now that Jimmy G is done there and that Kyle is tired of building an offense for his QB, and that he sees Kirk as being the ideal fit for what Kyle wants to do. I think that there's a path to get Kirk realistically to San Fran. And I'd like to be the first to actually do this instead of just like being smart asses about it, to really get him there and to see if it's plausible.
I think it's speculation.
I think it is. I think it's funny to talk about, but the more I think about this, I think the nail is in the Garoppolo coffin.
Hey, you held him to 20 points, man. You gave us a chance at the end, but I got 3 words for you. You like that?
I think they finished 5-11. I think this game against the Packers was a blip. I know they got some winnable games on their schedule. I wouldn't be shocked if they lost to the Lions this weekend. And so if they were to finish 5-11, last year the Miami Dolphins picked 5th overall and they were 5-11. I believe they picked 5th overall, but the 5th worst record was 5-11.
Okay.
6-10, 1, 2, 3, 4 would have you as the 9th worst record in the NFL and the 10th worst record. That's what the Jaguars and Browns were.
I want to be top 10 for picking.
Well, 6-10 is pretty safe.
I want to be
safe.
top 10.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Purple Daily. Be sure to give us, if you could, it would help us, a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts, and click that subscribe button on youtube.com/Purple Daily Podcast. And we will see you guys tomorrow.